Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Activism panel. The panel will begin in a few minutes. Please be seated and turn your phones on Do Not Disturb. Thank you.
Dialogues around environmental activism and the struggle for climate justice excludes most, if not all, narratives of the communities most impacted by environmental.
But 3 degrees of global warming would be catastrophic.
Heat waves, droughts, extreme precipitation, even fire.
Identification of this inequity sprout out for you.
The Environmental Protection Agency is aware that Black and brown communities and low-income communities are breathing unclean air, drinking unclean water.
Climate colonialism is when developed and industrialized countries live at the ecological expense of other countries.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Mic.
Currently, climate change is the greatest global threat to our population and planet. Average global temperatures have warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1880, bringing the planet dangerously close to the tipping point of 1.5 degrees scientists have identified to irreversibly alter the Earth's climate system. Since 2018, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets to protest against environmental degradation. Despite this, global targets are still being struggled to be met. As the world is increasingly affected by the consequences of climate change, it has also become increasingly apparent that environmental shifts disproportionately affect marginalized communities, worsening social, economic, and racial inequalities. In the last decade, the amount of displaced people due to disaster has increased by 41%, which is expected to only increase as populations contributing least to climate change statistically are the most vulnerable. While we have seen the presence of policy, advocacy, and grassroots movements driving positive change in the face of this global crisis, other innovations have shown to massively benefit rich communities, for example carbon capturing, while negatively impacting others. Hello, my name is Beatrice Metis, and I'm a 12th grade student here at ISL and a member of the YFS series team. I would like to welcome you to the YFS panel, Exploring Environmental Activism. Joining me for this session, I'm honored to welcome Rosana Gomez da Silva, climate justice activist, presenter in television, and Harvard Aspire leader. Rosana Gomez da Silva is currently completing a master's degree researching climate change and injustice and population profiles of heat exposure in Brazil. I'm also proud to welcome, to my far left, Salma Melissa Mohammadian Terrassas, who is currently leading the Scale 360 project in the Global Shapers Hub Morelia. Her expertise are creating more sustainable business models and accelerating the transition to a circular economy. The first 25 minutes of this session, we will allow our panelists to answer the questions I've prepared and discuss them openly, with the remaining time allowing you, the audience, to ask any questions you have about environmental activism and justice. If you'd like to ask a question at any point of this panel, please send them to the following code on Mentimeter: 67831671. Okay, now we will begin with our questions. Ms. Silva, you have been involved in the climate justice movement Could you please define what the climate justice movement means to you and tell us a bit more about your work that you've been doing in this activist space?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Brazilian, so I'm kind of yay person. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit suffering from this cold weather. This is normal for you guys. For me, it's 100% not normal. So, yeah, I'm really happy to be here to talk about climate justice with all of you. Just a little bit intro. I'm from Brazil, a Brazilian favela. I don't know if you guys have any idea about what is this. From a riverside community, house made of woods, no sanitation, no access to proper food, proper water, and everything. I grew up in a community like that, a poor community like that. And we faced the consequences of climate change every single day. Once in a year, at least, we face big floods. We got our houses destroyed. And this is happening every single year. And we know it's going to happen. And nobody does anything. Last year, just talking to Beatrice, last year, I don't live in a house like that. My family just moved to other place, of course, but most of my family still live there. And last year, I had a cousin who was 9 months pregnant, and she lost everything in her house due to the big floods. So it should be normal to fear rain. It shouldn't be normal to fear when start raining. And this is about climate justice. Brazil face a lot of consequences of climate change, but poor community face the fear of losing houses, losing everything. And we already have so little, we don't have access to food, to proper water, and still we're afraid to lose the small things we have. A little bit nervous to be talking with all of you. I'm not a native English speaker, so if I say something that doesn't make sense, you guys please tell me. But yeah, the second question was, what is climate change and
Climate justice.
yeah, what is climate justice? So climate justice, it is we have to face that people face the consequences of climate change different way. So we have to approach climate change in a different way for different communities. So Black and marginalized and indigenous community in Brazil, they face the climate change in a different way from rich communities and mostly white communities. So the problem is when we're talking about climate change in the public spheres, in public spaces, unfortunately, marginalized community, indigenous community, they aren't there. So they don't have voices. So we are currently planning how to act towards climate change without the voice of marginalized Black and indigenous community in Brazil. So when we talk about climate justice, we talk about not letting anyone behind. And this is what the United Nations tell us to do also.
Okay, thank you so much. That's information that we need to process.
Yeah.
I would like to now move to you, Ms. Mohammadian. What are some examples that you can think of how can a transition to a circular economy and sustainable business allow vulnerable communities to be less exposed to the negative effects of climate change?
I think that's a good question. Of course, I come to a place where I'm privileged. And for me, it was more about understanding how people that doesn't have justice in climate live, because I don't know. And of course, I learn a lot from them. So for me, it's more about being empathic with their situation and learn before you help them, because sometimes you think that you are going to do things for help them, but actually it's the opposite way. So for me, it's more about understanding the approach that you're going to have for them, because I want to let something clear. For me, climate justice is on our hands because the privileged ones, because are the ones that contaminate the most to because we are consumers. And what I learned through circular economy is that people with low income is actually the ones that are recycling the best. In my country, for instance, they know exactly which products has to be recycled because they live through that. They earn money, the money that they have to pay food or all that stuff, it's earned by the trash that we generate in each day as a consumers. So that's why one of my key learnings for that is that sometimes because we feel that we are more educated, because we have schools, we have degrees and all that stuff, we believe that they don't have to teach us anything, but actually it's the opposite in, on topics on climate, of course, because they know how to live through earthquakes, rain, and consumption, and also about consumerism. You know, when you go and put your clothes on the trash, they also renew and reuse it for their kids and all that stuff. So I think their lifestyle is more about entrepreneur and ecological lifestyle than us. So for me, it's about how they can teach us to be more aware of their conditions and how can we also learn from their mistakes because we don't see them. For me, and we were talking about another panel in our country, and their topic were really good, is like these ones. But the people, like you, were people that live in a green, lovely space, and they don't see raining because they're, oh, raining, it's snowing, it's okay. I have this amazing school, which is warmer than outside. So we don't see actually the impact. They live it. So for me, it was like, we need to understand the way they live, be empathized. If you sometimes could go there and try to see the lifestyle they have, you could be more empathized. And not only just, oh, I will give you fruit from free, because they don't want that. Maybe you need to show them how to rebuild and make new skills to learn how they do food in their backyard, how to recycling, or where they should be taking the materials to recycle so that they could earn more money, more about that things that we know and we have contact to because we have internet, we have amazing schools, we know that information, and they don't have that information. So for me, it's more about how can we be allies about climate justice for them in order to only be the heroes for their injustice right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this insight. Now I have a question for you both. So, Ms. Mohammadian, Ms. Silva, can you think of some examples of racial, economic, and indigenous inequalities being exacerbated by climate change?
I want to start.
You should. Yeah.
I'm gonna start from racial. I'm a black woman from Brazil, and in Brazil we are 56% of the population. Black women are the majority of the family leaders, so we are actually who makes the economic system of Brazil works. But we also the poorest percentage of Brazil. So I am a daughter of a black woman who raised me alone as a cleaning lady. With so not too much money, if you imagine. I went to public schools. I lived through all the vulnerability of a black person, poor person in Brazil. And despite all that, I still have to think about climate change, making food accessibility harder, making proper water accessibility harder. Because food is getting more expensive in Brazil. Proper water is getting harder in Brazil, even though we have a lot of water. Energy is getting so expensive in Brazil. We have communities that don't have access to energy every day. They only have access to energy like once in a week. So it's really hard to imagine a life like that you have to worry if you have something to eat instead of studying. So with climate change, this is gonna be so hard. It is already so hard because we're talking about climate change as a future thing, but it's happening right now, and it's impacting us right now. And for me, the bigger point on this is that the poor community don't know this is happening. They don't understand this is happening, and this is happening because of the consumers and people who have money today and who is making the decisions today, not thinking with these poor communities. So this is the hard part for me, because if they knew this is happening in like this, they could do something. They could do like movements or something like that. But if you go talk to my mom about this, she will not understand properly. She will not understand.
Exactly.
So that's the hard part for me.
And also, I think there are different communities that are, going through this climate justice, injustice. There is more about the low-income people, the one that lives in coast, for example. In Mexico, we have a tornado. That's called. Yeah. From one of our coasts, it's Acapulco, and they were like devastated, like the rich, the poor, everything. But of course, the help comes first to the rich people than the poor people. So for me, it's more about finding the sector that you believe has opportunities to reskills, and also as students and leaders, try to connect with those and teach them new skills so that they can live in their own world, because you can bring them here or you can go there. It's the lifestyle they have. They are used to that. Even it's sad, but they're used to that. So for me, it's more about creating projects that really connect with their causes and also help them to develop new industries or develop new, I don't know, food in their backyards, but give them the skills so that they could be more aware of the situation and have the tools. So when it comes, they could be more prepared about that, because it's going to happen. I mean, climate action is going somewhere, but at the end, it's not going to change next day.
Yeah.
I mean, we will keep coming rain, earthquakes, all of that will continue to happen. And for humans, I think we should be prepared and also not be jealous of the knowledge that we have and share it with humanity. One time, a couple of friends were talking about climate change and all that stuff, and we were like, we have a resolution about climate action, and it's climate justice, sustainability, and all that stuff. For me, it's about how humans could live in this planet. It's not about the planet supporting humans. It's about how can humans be here, because the planet, if we die tomorrow, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be like, oh, thank you so much, give me a break. But how can we live here and not destroying it, and be careful with our own lifestyle? It's our life. It's not, of course, the planet's life, but the planet is going to be good without us. It's about how can we be good to them, because we like it. We like here, we like to live here. We don't want to go to Mars or something like that. I love Earth. So for me, it's more about how can we teach new skills to live here and be more aware of our actions to our planet. I think it's like the resume of everything.
Thank you. Yes. So my next question is, how do you think the environmental activism movement can help combat such inequalities, and how can this be integrated into the activist movement?
I think, as she said before, the most the mainly role of privileged people for me, it is to open space, open opportunities to marginalized and poor community to talk about this. I think environmental activism in Brazil, especially, we are trying to do that, but I am kind of really privileged to be here. I'm in Switzerland. I'm talking about this. But people in Brazil, like in indigenous community today, who tries to do this, they face violence. They face the danger of homicide, actually. We have data of violence against environmental activism in Amazon that is horrifying. And this is happening today. This happens in Mexico also. This happens in the whole Latin America, the territory I know a little bit about. So I'm kind of a special place right now because I can't talk openly about this. But outside of here, people don't get this opportunity. So that's our main role in all these movements, to open space.
Yeah, I will say give them voice because sometimes we just assume we know what they miss, but we don't know actually. For me, about the recycling work that I have done in Mexico, they teach me everything. I work with them. I went to the mountains on garbage in my hometown. My friends don't believe me, but I do. I swear to God, I do. And they teach me how to recycling because I didn't know. I assumed how to, but they teach me each part of the glass of water, your deodorant, your shampoo material that have a lot of chemicals, how to recycling that part of each material. So they know things, they know their lifestyle. Sometimes they even know more about climate than us. So for me, it's more, if you want to have a project about sustainability, you have to create new ideas, call them, introduce yourself to them, show them your idea so that they can share with you their point of view and also give them a voice in decision making because we have that skill. Probably politicians or other leaders from big companies, they don't assume that or they don't even look at them, but we can, and it's part of our lives also. So my advice will be to connect with them and also just come with a chair so that they could be seated and also have an opinion about the project that you're going to implement about sustainability in your hometown, in your school, in your city, because they have a good ideas also because they are living with less things and we are trying to live with less things as a consumers. So they could teach you a lot and also you can have a better project and more impactful project or idea if you open up to include them in your shareholders, stakeholders, or also in the volunteering programs. I think you will be more, also more human to let them be and be part of the projects.
Okay, thank you. So now I would like to ask you both again. Maybe Ms. Silva, you can start. What role do you believe grassroots organizations have in combating climate change and climate injustice? And can these help on a systematic level?
Yeah, actually, these movements have the answer. We are trying so hard to find the answers, and indigenous communities, they do that. They live that way like for centuries now, and we are trying still to figure it out, and they just have the answer. I lived like 2 weeks in the Riverside community in the Amazon last year. I had this opportunity, and they were for 10 years, I think, exploring the forest. So doing deforestation, and this we know this is not good. This is bad, but the problem is they have to eat, right? They have to access food somewhere, and this was the main activity of the community. And a few years ago, the leader just got to know some organizations who talked to him and say, "Oh, maybe we can change something." And the community today lives based on sustainable tourism, and they make more money. They have more dignity. They live in a better way with the forest right now, and they are happier. They have more health and everything. So they found out the answer in like 5 years.
Yeah.
And we are trying to do that for so long right now. So for me, it's simple. The main role, they have the answer, but we are not hearing them properly.
Mhm. And I think we, as leaders and global leaders, we also have the power and information about, you know, what's going on in Switzerland that we can bring to Mexico and Brazil that
Yeah.
it's working, and also what we are doing in Mexico that could work here also. So we have this connectivity that no one else have, even though our parents doesn't understand the internet as we do. So for me, it's more about those type of organization and work with a local organization with society that is going on. I mean, that will be like the goal project that you will achieve. For me, it's more about always have some different actors in your projects or in your ideas. Doesn't If you're going to work with some coast or in the river or Amazonas and you think only Amazonas it could work, you have to bring every knowledge on the table so that you really understand and make the project by itself. We were talking about energy yesterday, and we were like, okay, in each part of the whole world, if someone is working on nuclear energy, if some country is working on that, the other country wants to work on that, even though it's not the best one for their needs. So for us, it's more about, do we have this all information in the internet? We are doing more and we are doing more investigation, but what is your path? Do you need nuclear energy or do you need eloic energy or something like that? Do you need tons of money for a project, or do you only need a company to give you resources to do that project?
Yes.
It's more about really, we have everything right now. We just need to have the idea, and instead, like when you go to a supermarket, which one I want, and you build a project based on that. We don't need tons of millions of dollars. We have companies that we can give the resources for free, and it's better because you don't have this taxes situation. So for me, it's more about what do you want, and choose stakeholders, allies, and also the resources you want to have, and not only just think about money, because we also always we think about money. And my advice will be, the money is the last thing you want to do, because it gives a lot of trouble about taxes, planning, you know, organizing that. So maybe just have allies to help you with the resources, and you will have the idea going on in like a year. So I think that would be it.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to thank you both, Ms. Mohammadian and Ms. Silva, for the positive message, knowledge, and expertise you've shared with us today. That is all I have in terms of questions, so we are now going to take a 2-minute break to allow you to process all of this information and prepare for any final questions for the panelists.
Thank you.
You can text your questions to the Mentimeter code seen here, or if you prefer to ask your questions in person, raise your hand and we will bring a mic to you. Keep the questions brief, and I will do my best to get to as many as possible. Thank you.
You're great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We will now begin with the questions from the audience. I would like that you please stand up, state your name and school, followed by a brief question if you're asking a question in person. We do need you to speak into the microphone so that it can be, we can upload this panel to the website, so please use the microphone. Yes. Does anyone have a question in person?
Don't be afraid.
Yes. In the back, Ms. Gorman.
Can we explain that?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank both of you. I consider myself, hands down, probably one of the most detailed recyclers on this campus. I'll take a bet against anybody. However, the message I got from you, it doesn't matter that I am a good recycler if I keep buying the same products and recycling them. So I really heard this. It was a clear message. And as you said, you don't need the money as much as you need the activism of people to be conscious of that. Reusing the things that we buy things that we can reuse, and not just, yeah, I'm a great recycler, but there it goes again, right?
Yeah.
And probably sometimes ends up in a landfill and not even getting recycled at a center. So I'm grateful for that insight from my place, where I've always prided myself in being an amazing recycler. But I heard a different thing today, and that was like, choose the things that I am purchasing that are not going to have such an effect on the environment. So thank you for that message.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, exactly. I think one point is fashion. You know, like people see clothes as one way.
We
only
love fashion.
One time. Yeah, we are fashion girls. And reuse a clothes is nice. I think social media just give us this whole idea that if you have a beautiful look, you use once and you never use it again. You know, this is what big companies is teaching you. Always like, purchase more, buy the new phone that just goes out like yesterday, and you throw away your old phone. But your old phone works. Why do you need a new one just because it's new? You know, so social media maybe gives us this idea that we need to be on top of things every day, and this is destroying our planet, actually.
Yeah, and I think I will just complement that, because with when you throw away things or you're recycling things, my message will be just be aware of the thing that you put into trash, that for someone is food, money, or even it's going to get a difficulty, try to separate the trash that you are mixing with food and glass and pets. So for me, it's more about be aware of that, because in Mexico and in all America, we just, our cycle finish when we put trash in a basket, and that's our final thing for trash. And then a bus came and we throw that garbage on it, and that's it. And then we find out that there was this plastic island in somewhere in the ocean, and they were like, oh my God, companies are so mean. Why are they doing that? And we were like, oh no, we are the ones that do that. But we never think about that, and we were like, but wait, our trash is not always going to a bus and that's it, right? Where is going? Where the trash is going? And then we realized that it's going to a landfill, and then there are people working on landfill separating things so that they can have something to eat. So our trash means so much to other people. I'm talking about climate justice, and we don't even see it, because for us it's just like, oh, package. I want my phone. I don't want the pet or the plastic that is in it. So I will just say that when you put something into trash, just remember that for someone, that is money, food, or even a lifestyle, or probably someone is gonna get sick if you don't separate your, I don't know if you're sick, ill, or something like that. You're going to make this situation going. So that will be it. Just to keep open your mind about that. For us, maybe the process ends when we put it in the trash, but for someone, just the process is starting for them. So just be aware of that. I would think will be my message.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question from the Mentimeter. What is your process when creating and implementing projects to help communities?
Oh my God, I love that. Well, for me, I will, as Shaper, Shapers is a global network and we are leaders. We are Shapers, it's supposed to be like that. For me, it's just the crazy idea you have on the table, just do it. If you don't know how to start it, don't worry about it. But truly, when you feel passionate about, even though sometimes people think you're crazy because they are going to believe you're crazy. I mean, I'm here in Switzerland and I don't feel as much as crazy because you have a really good education and all that stuff. But in my country, I'm the craziest one because what is circular economy? What are you talking about those topics? So for me, it's more about be aware of the idea that you have. Just keep working on it. You will find allies. I mean, the first step is idea. Start talking with some allies that you see that they could understand the topic. Probably they're not experts, but they could understand it and work with you to make the project. Then for me, the project will be network to find allies. As I said, sometimes we think we need money, but sometimes it's just the resources, and there's a lot of organizations around the world that help people, and they even sometimes spend their money in other things because they don't have enough allies for their programs. So look it up on internet, find, I don't know, resources, funding, and all that stuff so you can implement the project. And also, if you have a really low income area, just go one day and present yourself. Hi, I'm Salma, and I'm going to learn from you. If you want me to, I want to one day go with you and see how is your lifestyle, so I can be aware of my actions and study your market. I would think that would be another example. But the first step is just think the craziest idea and just do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Ms. Silva, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think for me, just like start somewhere. Like if you have a social media account, start from there. If it can be simple, right? It can be simple acts every single day. The only thing that you can do is just not do anything, as Timothy just told us. Like to not do anything, it is doing. So act today and be simple. If you don't have resources, one post, one Instagram account, or something like that, you are already doing something. Someone is starving today. Someone is freezing to death today, unfortunately. This is a reality. Someone is needing help today. So you can, with simple things, you can start, and then you go to the bigger things. I don't think me and someone, we started like big, going to Switzerland and everything.
No.
We started little in our community. We start to do little things here and there, and then we combine all this, and then we are here today.
Yeah.
So start small, start with small things, and then you go up and up, because these become a purpose of life,
Yeah.
not just an action or just a project. This becomes your lifestyle.
Your mission.
Yeah, I think that's very important for us to know. Okay, so our next question is, I think we have time for two more questions. Yes.
I mean,
What are the 3 most important adaptations that the communities that you work with will need to adopt to survive in a world increasingly affected by climate change? So, hard question.
Wow.
I think, for instance, it will be skills. They need to know things about the technology that we have right now, about their ecosystems, about the things that they need to survive to climate action and climate change. Because, as I said, we could have the solution right now, but it won't see until 10 years from now. So they need to be prepared for that also. What other thing will be?
I think for me is leadership skills. Like the leaders that we have today needs to be more cooperative, I don't know how to say this.
Cooperative.
Yes, this
Activist.
this word. To pronounce some words in English is hard. They need to really leave the situation.
Yes. And
The
they
problem we have is that people who are making the decisions, they didn't leave the situation, the reality.
They
So
just assume.
yeah, so they just assume. So we need powerful leadership that comes from, for me, mainly from youth, because
Yes.
we have these open skills to talk to someone new and really be open to their reality.
Yes.
So today, who are making the decisions doesn't have that.
Yeah, and I think I will give an example. We were talking with the government in our hometowns about recycling process, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we do training for recycling," and I was like, "Yeah, but from who? Who is your people that you give the workshops?" Low-income people, and I was like, "But they know more about recycling than you. Why are you doing workshops to them? It's for us. We need the workshops. The consumer need the workshop, not the low-income people, because they are experts. They know more about it than me." Than you.
Yeah.
So I think that's an example of how, as youth, we can see a global vision, and you could connect with the government leaderships and all that stuff, so you can interact and go to the right path.
That
Yeah.
ties in well with the last question, which is, what would your main message be to the youth who is stepping into their power now, who want to join the fight against climate change and environmental injustice?
The questions are getting harder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this will.
I
we have only like a few minutes, so
I would just said some quote that our head lead taught us last summer. It was about, don't feel ashamed of your privilege. Feel ashamed if you don't do something with that. Because we are privileged, and sometimes we just feel so bad because it's a new tendency to feel bad about the things you have. But for me, it's more about, don't feel bad, just help them, other people, to have the same opportunities that our father and our mom and family works for us to have, because our family works so hard to give us these opportunities, and we have the skills to do that for other people. It doesn't have to be our families, because sometimes we don't even want kids. So we have a lot of humans that need skills and need our expertise, so that we can help them. I think that would be my
okay.
my
Ms. Silva?
You have the power today. You're not like growing up to have some power or some opportunity to make a change. You have this opportunity today. Just to be a youth, just to be a young people today and be interested in topics like this makes you powerful, makes you needed in the whole world. If I was you today, I would be like getting out of here and starting a project or something, because you have so good infrastructure. This is amazing, you know. Like, I studied in a school that we didn't even have books, because we had to change to borrow books from another person. So this is amazing. So you have the power today. So you can do great things today, not when you have 30s or 20 years. Today with 15, 14, I don't know, I know a girl who had 13, and she was incredible.
All
So
of
you
are.
have the power today, so
Yes.
start.
Okay, thank you. That is all the time we have today, as this session is now coming to an end. I'd like to thank the audience for your questions and your participation, as well as our panelists for sharing their experiences and insights into the important topic of climate justice and environmental activism. If you have any other questions, please feel free to approach the speakers after this session. Just keep in mind the time before the session hereafter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We are about to start the panel, so if I could ask everyone to please take their seats and turn your phones on silent. The digital era has ushered in rapidly into the modern world over the last few years, and at the forefront of this evolution is blockchain, a decentralized ledger technology that holds the promise of revolutionizing how we interact, transact, and trust in the interconnected realms of technology and our everyday lives. As we witness the ascent of blockchain from a niche concept to a mainstream phenomenon, our distinguished panelist, an expert in his field, will guide us through the intricacies of this digital revolution. This panel will focus on what blockchain is, how the technology works, and the future of blockchain. In the panel, there will be a focus on the future of blockchain in general and how it will influence our daily lives moving forwards, as well as blockchain's future in helping climate change by using technologies to secure the transactions of carbon credits, as well as sustainability tracking within companies. Together, we aim to delve into the promises, challenges, and real-world applications of blockchain in the present and in the future. Hello, my name is Fabienne Steen and I'm an 11th grade student here at ISL and a proud member of the YFS series team. I would like to welcome you to the panel, Harnessing the Power of Blockchain. Joining me for this session, I'm honored to welcome a very experienced professional who has worked in the blockchain industry for a very long time and has extensive knowledge on different areas of the subject. Please welcome Mr. Andrew Kessler. Mr. Kessler has worked internationally with government initiatives and the private sector in various tech startups for the last 15 years out of South Africa and Switzerland. Andrew has an academic background in chemistry and biochemistry and a strong knowledge base in cryptography. He has applied this knowledge towards building better blockchain protocols, which are now being used to deploy in-depth financing solutions in agriculture, decarbonizing our economy, and game league management. The first 25 minutes of the session will allow Mr. Kessler to answer the questions that I have prepared for him and discuss them openly with you, with the remaining time allowing you, the audience, to ask any questions you have about blockchain. If you would like to ask a question during that session, please raise your hand and a member of our team will come by with a microphone. So without further ado, I would like to begin with, for those in the audience who are unaware or not sufficiently informed about this topic, could you just give us a brief explanation on exactly what blockchain is and what makes it so secure?
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you guys today. And I hope we can make it a bit more informal. A lot of times you start talking about financial instruments, which is more boring than discussing soup. The promise of what blockchain is and what it can be has kind of been forgotten. Just to remind everyone, in 2009, when blockchain was really what was really the Bitcoin protocol in the day was going out, people were being imprisoned. Governments were rounding up blockchainers and throwing them into jail because of the threat that they posed to social structure. And what was so terrifying about this concept? There are a lot of key things that we depend on as a society for value. These are things like voting, payments, identifying yourself. And traditionally, the infrastructure cost you have to pay to set these things up is enormous. So think about setting up your own postal service. You'd have to buy like 1 million vans to be able to reach everyone's house in Switzerland. And so these verticals don't have competition. They're very inefficient, and they don't offer a lot of utility. What blockchain is, it's a technology where you can define these infrastructural things with nothing more than software. So just like the advent of email took messaging out of the postal service's hands and gave it into the private sector, we've seen the advent of companies like Tencent with over 1 billion human-connected users receiving messaging platforms. But for everything that kind of matters, how you choose to identify yourself, how we think of value, how we think of trade, and how we sort of take ownership of driving digital society 2.0, this is the promise of blockchain. There are two kind of competing models, and it's by no means the solved technology. So there's kind of a feeling like, oh, blockchain is that thing that we all know and understand, and that's rubbish. There are people that are still trying to think out these very difficult fundamental issues. By show of hands to help me kind of get a sense of your technical exposure to blockchain, who's heard of the terms proof of stake and who's heard of the terms proof of work? Okay, that's fantastic, because normally you get like no hands raised. So that means I can sort of dig in a little bit deeper. What should qualify you to have a voice in a public network? Is it one man, one voice? And how do we go about counting these sorts of things? So the idea behind proof of stake is if you have money to pay for something, you should have a vote to participate in that thing. Proof of work says that's bollocks. If you can participate and add meaningful work, that alone should entitle you to some voice within the system. And so these are radically different competing ideologies, and these things are completely non-trivial. But the promise of blockchain is that we can reshape society. If you travel through Africa and the developing world, you'll notice that there's only two things that have global penetration, Coca-Cola and cell phones. And so if you're not bolting what you're doing, like voting or education or gaming or whatever it is, onto a cell phone, it's not going to move the needle for the globe. And that's why blockchain is incredibly important.
Thank you very much, Andrew. But in the spirit of YFS and just talking about many issues that I think will be discussed over the day today, in the context of climate change, how can we apply blockchain technologies, or how are these technologies being applied in the context of climate change, or more specifically using the technology for carbon credit tracking?
So this is a very good topic to introduce probably the most important concept in blockchain. Blockchain isn't magic. It doesn't mean you can't cheat the system. It doesn't mean that you can't copy data. It doesn't mean that you can't collude with colleagues. The security model boils down to something called make your enemy stick to his word. So you can do whatever you want, but the blockchain is going to make sure that everyone knows about it. And this has the sort of very simple and eerie effect of making people act more honorably. This was kind of, I think, ironically, the promise of Twitter, was that people would be held to account, that you could have public forums, you could make things go viral, you could get the word out there if things weren't kind of conforming to your belief or understanding of it. So I think Twitter kind of enshrines the sentiment, but blockchain as a technology achieves this at a technical level. And it's a very peculiar idea that a company that's for profit, that's very capitalist and would sell their own grandmother if they could, is investing into carbon credits to try and save the future of the environment. Why would they care? How do they do this? And so the answer is, and I don't want to name large corporations here, but a lot of it's, and I can't swear on stage either, a lot of it is just for show. So they adopt a lot of these programs for thought leadership. And they run these little experiments in some country to show how great they are, but they don't have real impact. So carbon credit programs have a lot of room for improvement. If you're looking at inefficiency, if you're looking at where people say one thing but do something else, there's a lot of that in traditional carbon credit environments. And by bringing in a blockchain, a public ledger where everyone can see what everyone's actually doing, and when you actually do something, you have to sign for it and take accountability, and this can be done at machine level, it is starting to move the needle. But we're far from seeing a kind of a robust model. There are two kinds of very different people playing in the carbon credit space. They're what we call registration or registrar groups. They don't trade the carbon credits. They just certify that a carbon credit is valid for a certain ton of carbon. And the problem is there's a lack of standardization. So one certificate can misrepresent what impact it really does have in sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. And then the other group, of course, are the carbon credit traders who are doing it for profit.
Thank you. So you did touch on this briefly, but I was wondering if we could go a little bit more into depth about in the ways that blockchain enhance the transparency and traceability in the context of carbon crediting, or just within companies, within pieces of data. Just in what ways does
Yeah, absolutely. So we sort of, if there's interest in it, we can delve into it in further questions. But one of the problems that you have, I was listening to the panel discussion on the future of medicine and healthcare, and the term phygital was introduced. So phygital is the objective of it, what it's trying to achieve, is to unify what's happening in the physical world with what's happening in the digital world, that something is both physical and digital. And this is really difficult to achieve, especially if you have an incentive, an economic incentive. So who's keeping track of actual carbon credits? Who's going into a field and saying there actually is this much growth? Or, I mean, there's different carbon sequestration technologies, but who does these audits? Now they leave a physical environment and they enter a digital environment and they go, it's all good. And, things work well for a time until you discover that the auditors are the problem. So it seems kind of self-defeating, but the first thing that you must realize is the biggest amount of error comes from digital sources, duplications in documents not accurately reflecting what's going on. And so bringing transparency to that, and we always think about transparency, or we think about trustworthiness or efficiency at a human level. But the real power of blockchains is that we're giving machines the ability to do this work for us. So it's not, that there's some guy who wakes up every morning and checks all the issuance on a ledger. These are algorithms. These are applications that do it. They can have trigger events. So they can also, if you start measuring stuff and monitoring them, you can set policy and you can manage what's going on. So transparency has had a huge impact in that. And then you have kind of like, I don't know, it's a concept called upvoting. It's prevalent in many platforms. Somebody can ask a question and then the rest of people can upvote it to say, yes, that is relevant. It's a way of kind of doing like a real-time survey or poll to say, we care about this. And so when you have something on a blockchain, people can upvote things and draw attention to, there's a real problem with this carbon credit, or there isn't there. So you're bringing social awareness and accountability into the process.
Thank you. But within that, and it being able to enhance traceability and transparency, do you think that there's a privacy and data security concern that just factors into the implementation of like bringing these technologies in? And I mean, not just in the context of carbon credit markets, but using these technologies in our everyday lives and implementing them more and more. Is there a security risk, or is there something that you think people are more worried about than they should be?
This is a very good question. It's probably worth actually spending a lot of time unpacking this. Traditionally, you kind of have to sacrifice, you're trading three design parameters against each other. How much utility does a particular technology have? How much privacy does that technology have? And how much security does that technology have? So you can make things very secure by having no privacy, right? But I wouldn't call that a win. We haven't sort of achieved our objective by doing it that way. And this is a real problem because who of you have heard of the term CBDCs? So the idea of a CBDC is that governments want to take kind of some of the nuts and bolts out of blockchain technology to create digital dollars or digital euro or digital francs. I personally can think of nothing more terrifying than a CBDC. If that ever sort of gains popular traction, it's time to start getting into your nuclear bunkers and stocking up on canned food. And the reason is, can you imagine a government who not only can surveil your movements by using a security network of cameras on roads, but they can monitor what you spend your money on and how do they use that information? And the answer is not in a responsible way. So to your point, you can have a lot of utility. It's great to have a digital currency where you don't have to go to the bank to draw a stupid piece of paper. But on the other hand, you now have really violated everyone's most sacred right. Like voting. Raise your hands if you think voting actually matters. I'm just curious. This isn't judgment. I just want to know kind of how to divide the room. Okay, so for those of you who believe, who of you believe that conceptually voting is a good idea? Okay, I think we've got a bit more hands on the second question, right? The most practical way to vote is with your money. Put your money into the stuff you care about, and you'll see more of it. Take your money away from stuff you don't believe in, you'll see less of it. And that cuts through a lot of the BS. That's a very honest form of voting. So, you know, moving money into the private sector is probably the most important thing that we can do as a society to maintain privacy. So Bitcoin was very big on this. This was kind of their whole thing, was that this is private sector money, this isn't government money, right? CBDCs is like the man's response to that, saying, no, we're actually going to double down. We're going to dress up. And I'm not talking about strong democratic countries. They actually have pretty good guidelines on CBDC initiatives. I'm talking about more authoritarian run governments. They see the promise of CBDCs as a way to kind of control their group and do mass surveillance, which is a real problem that you need a real solution for. And so when you're using a blockchain technology, what you're doing is you're adding a fair amount of utility, but you're creating public data structures that everyone can view all the time for now and into the future. So even if you're encrypting data that you put onto the blockchain, the most powerful attack, the biggest hack that's ever going to happen, will happen in the next 15 years using a concept called SNDL, which is store now, decrypt later. So if there are any young hackers in the room, get onto a server, copy all that data, and just keep it. Just put it on a thumb drive, chuck it in the back of your cupboard, and wait 15 years. When quantum computing becomes a real thing, you'll trivially be able to decrypt these secure messages and work out what was happening 15 years ago. So, I mean, there are a lot of data brokers who are just dumping all encrypted data, especially that on blockchains, because it's financially relevant and it's worth money. And they're storing it, waiting for the day when they can decrypt it. And so, again, to cycle back to the question and to kind of wrap it up, you're always trading utility against security against privacy. And so with a lot of blockchain technologies, the promise is that everything's public. That's how you hold people accountable. But the downside, the price you have to pay, is there is no privacy. And so you really have to think about solving for that. That's why you'll hear such a big buzz. A16Z, is anyone familiar with Andreessen Horowitz? A16Z are a VC firm. They fund a lot of the cool new tech. They've got very deep pockets. They invest in everything disruptive. And they're really, really, really keen on something called zero-knowledge proofs because they think that this technology will enable blockchains to both have utility and transparency, but also preserve privacy. It's kind of the holy missing grail to have all three, all of the benefits, none of the drawbacks.
Thank you. And I think that, as you said, I mean, data and privacy, like being one of them, do you think that there are, or what are the regulatory challenges associated with using blockchain as well as implementing it into more spaces and into society, and how do you think that these things should be addressed, or what should happen to, one, make people feel more comfortable in using these technologies, or just to overcome the challenges?
Yeah, so you've got, and this is hilarious because what governments have the luxury of doing is passing legislation, but they don't have to bear the cost of implementing that legislation, so they can pass the cost on to enterprise. And so for a lot of enterprises, the problem is they have increasing responsibility, as they should. But that brings with it increasing cost, and they have less profitability. So the day data privacy became a thing was the day social media became squarely the realm of people like Meta, because only Meta can afford to bear the cost of compliance. It actually is damaging to people that want to be innovative, because you come up with a lot of cool ideas, 90% of those ideas get killed in regulation because it's not private enough, or it isn't, there's not enough oversight. And this isn't a good spirit to foster innovation. And so to your question, which is a very good one, data privacy regulation and financial regulation cannot be met. They are mutually exclusive frameworks of law. You're going to either violate data privacy or you're going to violate financial obligation, pick. And I'll give you an example. A fintech or banks need to be able to demonstrate public record keeping. They need to be able to stand up to any agency and say, this is exactly what's happening. But if you look at GDPR, which is kind of Europe's data privacy framework, it's not really laws. These laws are enacted at national level. So the way that GDPR is enacted in Norway is different to how it's enacted in France, is different to how it's enacted in Germany, but they follow these kind of common guiding principles, right? So you have the right to be forgotten. This is fantastic. You can probably get some money out of a lot of companies by just ringing them up and say, I want you to prove to me I've used your social media service. I no longer wish to enjoy it. Prove to me you've deleted all of my data. It's very hard to do. I mean, how do you prove something that's negative? And if they can't prove it to you, you can win damages up to $50 million per infraction. It's a great way to make money, right? So that's data privacy law. So you go to your bank and you say to them, prove to me that you've deleted all my financial records, otherwise you're in violation of GDPR compliance. Well, they can't do that because the financial arm says they have to maintain your records. They need to be able to report on it in perpetuity. And so, I mean, these sentiments are both valid. One stops money laundering and fraud. The other enshrines your right to be private. But how do you bring these things together? So we live in a world where there's lots of good legislation, but not a lot of thinking about how do you actually achieve this. And people love to throw blockchain companies under the bus. It's an easy game to play. There's lots of money in it. There's lots of publicity. And so blockchains really struggle because they can meet financial regulation quite easily because it's an immutable permanent record for all of time. But with that come real challenges on how to deal with privacy.
All right, thank you. And lastly, just in general, what do you think the future holds for blockchain? And do you think it's important for us, all the youth, to start looking into and working with these technologies?
Yes, and no. No, I'm joking. The problem we have as humanity is we tend to prioritize short-term gain over long-term gain. Most of the time when people talk to me about blockchain, what they're really asking is, how do I invest $10 today to make $1,000 tomorrow? And that's kind of to miss the entire point of what blockchain was about. I worry deeply about the future of blockchain. So Harald Blautand was this weird Norwegian king. Norway back in, I don't know, it was the 14th century or something, had kind of like 11 competing tribes. And these tribes all spoke a different language, let alone dialect. And so their biggest challenge was just trying to find a common way to communicate. That was kind of what stopped them succeeding. And so Harald Blautand came along and figured out how to unify them linguistically. And if you look at his name, HB, and you make a symbol out of it in runic, that's the Bluetooth symbol because it's named after him. Because what Bluetooth is, it's a protocol that allows devices to speak a common language. So your weird Apple device on some weird OS can talk to that speaker system over there, and they can somehow collaborate as a set of devices. Bluetooth should have had massive impact on the world as we know it. Imagine medical IoT devices connecting you to a local network to, in real time, monitor the situation and then overlay that with an AI framework. I mean, this is really science fiction-y, awesome stuff. But what do we use Bluetooth for? And the answer is playing music. I mean, do we use it for anything else? So we have this like super powerful technology that we use as a rock to keep a door open because it gets hot in a room. And that's kind of what we're doing with blockchain, right? So I deeply worry about the future of blockchain because people have forgotten what the purpose was. The conversations that people are having in 2012 and 2014, no one's having anymore. It's very important, I think, for you guys to understand what blockchains are capable of, what their design frameworks were, and for us to see that value. Because as soon as you get into kind of like we live in a world that kind of follows what I call cartel mechanics, right? So the banks were totally freaking out until they figured out people need to spend dollars to buy Bitcoin. And where are they going to do that? And they realized, hang on, that's us. So they reinserted themselves back into the discussion and they went, okay, cool, it's business as usual. Because what the real discussion was in 2012 was, let's not use the dollar. The dollar is just a really, really, really bad technology for making payments. It's not a knock against the United States government. It's not a disbelief in the power of the economy. It's just using pieces of paper and digital versions of central currencies is just really slow and tedious. If you don't believe me, go to a fair and try and use what you need to have, like Twint, you need to have a banking app. You need like 5 apps to be able to sort of make average payments. There's no unifying payment rail. It's really difficult. And then you get double payments and all sorts of kind of difficulties. If people really understand the power of blockchain, they move away from trying to turn $1 into 2, and they go back to saying, but why do we have to integrate with a broken system? Why does it have to cash out to $1? Just last question, who's heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens? Okay, so you hear a lot of people saying, like a lot of old beards going, some guy paid a ridiculous sum of money for some stupid picture, now it's worth nothing. NFTs are a joke. But that's to miss the point entirely. NFTs was saying, a cryptocurrency says, this is something that you can use as a replacement for a coin. It represents price, but it doesn't represent value. Value comes from goods and services, things that you buy and sell, right? NFTs was saying, but hang on, we can use the same kind of crypto technology that made this Lemo coin. We can now also make stuff that has value. And so now what you have is you have value on the one side, you've got price on the other, you've got a medium of exchange. What you're doing is you're busy building out a software-defined marketplace. That's very exciting and very promising. So for all of you, I encourage you to think about the difference between what it means to be a member of society and what it means to be the member of a market, to think about what does it mean that something has value, to think about what does it mean for something to have price, because now you're going back to stuff that really matters. A lot of people go, oh, blockchain's just like, it's a fad, or it doesn't have value, or it's a Ponzi scheme. And again, that's to entirely miss the point. I would encourage all of you to take these topics deeply seriously, and to realize that there are many frameworks out there. Don't just become another Ethereum bro. Don't just become a Solana cultist. Think there's lots of protocols out there. They all have value. Diversify your mental thinking portfolio, and you guys are going to do great.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. That is all I have in terms of questions. So now we're going to take a quick break for you to process all of this information, and then we're going to go straight into the Q&A. If you guys do have a question, a member of our team will come by with the mic. Thank you. Thank you. And we will now begin our questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then Henry at the back will come by with the microphone.
Hi, I'm Ollie. So I have a question about how you were talking about like the member of society as well as being a member of market, as well as the investment in the long term instead of the short term. What do you think is the best way to use blockchain to be a part of both of those markets, as well as the long term instead of the short term?
Very, very good question. Capitalism is underrated as a concept. It gets a lot of negative press, but it creates something which is hard to find in other systems, and that's an incentive, right? Like the problem with what I'm going to call hypercapitalism is that what does success look like? It looks like if you draw an envelope around everyone that participates from a market and extracts value from that market. In hypercapitalism, that market shrinks, so less and less people can participate. And so the ones left over get more cut of the pie and become incredibly wealthy, so they're incentivized to do that, right? So part of thinking out like long-term success, we really have to look at what I'm going to call social capitalism models. So social capitalism says, I want to make a profit, I want to climb the ladder, but not at the expense of my fellow man. And because blockchain environments are software defined, we can really start experimenting with these sorts of things. You might hear about things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and that's really how do you write a kind of a program that replaces structures, whether they're a gaming guild through to a government. So if you move your model to social capitalism, then what you can do is you can try and expand the market envelope to allow as many people as possible to participate in it. So in economics, there are two very powerful concepts. The one is called Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency means that if there are 10 people participating, the system will make sure that they each get a fair cut. And economics kind of 1970s, 1980s was big on Pareto efficiency. But we moved recently to something called Nash equilibria. So the idea in a Nash equilibria is if you can make moves so that you get all the coins and everyone else gets absolutely nothing, you've done well. And so that's kind of been a shift in a lot of company strategy, is to maximize Nash equilibria. And that's super short-term thinking because people are far less foolish than we think that they are. I mean, I'm saying, companies think if we just wrap stuff in tinfoil and sell it with pretty girls, it'll sell. And that isn't the truth. And I say that, it sounds weird to say that. But social capitalism and defining and looking back at proof of work is really going to start opening up our ability to see long-term value. Proof of work was hated by a lot of people for a number of reasons. It has one drawback: it needs a lot of energy. The Bitcoin network, last time I checked, eats the energy of the country of Ireland to operate. And so a lot of people are like, well, okay, cool, so we have inclusion, we can have social capitalism, but not at the expense of global warming. And so the difficult part is not to abandon proof of work, but improve on it. The other thing is to think out data. So if you read up on something called information economics, this is the idea of if my medical data is worth something, I should be able to sell it and participate in that. I can get some of the value back. That's fairly mundane, but the thinking underneath is going to lay the foundation for what I'm going to call the file-based economy. So if you think about gaming currently does more revenue per year than all of Hollywood. Does anyone know what in-game item trades represent in revenue per year? It's now north of $100 billion per annum revenue. Okay, I mean, there are families that pay their rent exclusively through gaming and game item trading. Okay, and this isn't as foolish as it sounds. Game items are the closest thing to real-world assets that exist in computer systems. So my prediction is that in 2035, we'll mark the first time in human history that the value of the digital economy is greater than the value of the physical economy. So if you're looking for long term and you're looking for social capitalism, you should also be looking at what goods and services are bought and sold in a social capitalist framework, and it should be file-based economic things. That's at sort of high level. We can talk afterwards if you want to sort of look into more granular stuff, more specific stuff.
Is there anybody else? Okay, well, I have a question. So part of your bio and what you do is working with blockchain and putting that into game league management.
Yeah.
I think those are two topics that aren't often, like you wouldn't expect them to be together, but I just want to understand, how does blockchain go into things like video games? Like, how are those technologies being like combined together?
Great. So here I get to ask a question that if what I really want to see is who doesn't put up their hand, and this isn't to shame anyone. You don't have to just put up your hand to be part of the crowd. Who's heard of a guy called Mr. Beast? Okay, there we go. That's kind of what I expected. Now this guy is kind of vocal about being kind of against blockchain-based technologies. The traditional gaming community tend to frown on blockchain. So if Ubisoft stand up and say, we're on a blockchain, all gamers go. And the reason is it's being applied in a really terrible way. It's being applied to kind of enable microtransactions. It's pay to win. It's everything gamers hate, right? But that's really not like how you should, as a intelligent company, think about the value of blockchain within gaming. There's a fairly popular game called Counter-Strike, which is essentially a mod that was content generated by the community. So community-generated content mods should increasingly be more and more the norm for gaming. And for game communities, it makes game communities feel more included in a label. But now let's say you go and create the #1 mod, it becomes its own breakaway game. Shouldn't you be able to get some financial recompensation for that? And not in a capitalist way. A lot of these guys do it as passion projects, right? With money, they can employ more people to maintain their passion project. Otherwise, it just kind of dies on the shelf because you start needing things like server space, you need more like dev times, there's more bugs coming in on your Git repo. And these things are just very difficult to maintain without some sort of cash base. But do you really want to go and start a business just to do your passion project? Do you want to go to the bank and ask for a loan, right? So you can use like DeFi finance to push your project. So blockchain should really be in a gaming context, empowering the gamer to help influence the rule base for the game, to commit their content to the game, and to persist. And because then what happens is, like, have you ever had a really great product that's almost perfect but not quite? And don't you wish you could just go to the manager of that company and say, dude, just add on an extra slice of cheese and this is perfect, right? Because if he does that, and it's within his own selfish motivation to do that, because he will then sell more burgers and make more profit. So what blockchain enables in a gaming setting is collaboration, like real meaningful collaboration if you do it right. It should not be used for micropayments. So Mr. Beast is right. The top game labels have kind of dropped the ball on how they've implemented it, but they've missed the real opportunity. And so we're working with a company called eFuse. They do league management software. So guys buy passes to watch high-ranking leagues play games. And at the moment, the only exchange is that you pay money, you get to watch a game, right? But paying to support something means that you also get a right to get earlier content, to be more engaged in that community, specialized content, that sort of thing. So they had initially looked at using blockchain to solve for that, and we're really getting in on that level. But where we really want to get to is item creation and item trading.
All right, thank you. If no one has any other questions, that is all the time we have today, as the session is coming to an end very shortly. I would like to thank the audience for your questions and participation, as well as Mr. Andrew Kessler for sharing his extensive knowledge with us and helping us to understand these new technologies that are sorry? We no. No, my schedule says 5.
It's these kinds of discussions that make me just feel so wanted. There we go. Are we gonna cut?
Do you have a question for us, Mr. Koch?
At the back there.
Mr. Blackmore?
Are there any films or books that portray a version of the future that you think aligns with how you're thinking about blockchain? Something that we could go read or watch after the session?
That's a very good question. There are a lot of movies and films that kind of what's trending at the moment is apocalyptic versions of the future. George Orwell, government's got it wrong. You know, one lone warrior has to now go and sort of take on a corporate conglomerate, to get the antidote. So there's this kind of a dystopian foreboding to the future. And really take your pick. There's a whole range of really, really good movies. And the sentiment, this negative sentiment, isn't unjustified. One of the problems with science is that the ethics of science doesn't keep up with the rate of scientific revolution. There's a real danger in doing something just because you can, because you don't understand the unintended consequences. What do you think? What do you imagine would happen if the medical industry could cure cancer, all life-threatening illnesses, heart disease? Would society benefit, or would it be the thing that brings society down? And there's an argument to be made that medical innovation will collapse society, because suddenly you have people living 200 years, 300 years. Financial systems aren't geared. I mean, you go on pension at 60. You no longer financially contribute, but you're going to die at 300. So you're going to eat grants for more time than you contribute value. And how does population growth respond to people not dying, right? Do we just hit a population of 20 billion and hit resource crisis and plunge everyone into a war? So my point is just that you can start off with something that seems very harmless. Cool, we're going to improve this one thing over here, and then forget the global picture, and then sit with a real catastrophe. So the problem is it's the hyper capitalists that are driving blockchain, and they're not thinking out the long-term consequence of the kinds of things they're doing. A good movie to watch, it's Ender's Game. And what Ender's Game is really promoting is the idea that the power and impact of strategy. So I like Dune as a book series, and I like Ender's Game. They map to kind of all emerging technologies, and to sort of think about our role in it. Elon Musk has a famous quote where he says, one of two things will happen. The world has been around for 4-point-something billion years. Civilization as we know it is at best, if you count it from first writing, 8,000 years old. And this is nothing. This is the blink of an eye. If you assume any rate of progress, if things improve iteratively at all, then in the next 100 years, either we will be unable to distinguish games from reality, or civilization will end. One of those two things will happen. That's Elon Musk's view of how things progress from here. So what we really need, if we want to now have a happy outcome and not see that come to fruition, is we need to be very lateral in how we think about things. So Ender's Game is really impressing upon us the importance of lateral thinking. Similarly with Dune. So those are just sort of good sci-fis to look at, to think out. Yeah, they mirror. They're very sort of human in their narrative, and they kind of mirror what we experience. Ghost in the Shell is another good one. Yeah. Sorry, one more question.
Hi, it's me again. I have another question. So you were saying how, in the lateral, thinking, based upon Mr. Blackmore's views and books, right?
Yeah.
So we already have, climate credits in place, right? So what else do you think would be better than, climate credits, not only to create better for the long term, is sort to say.
Absolutely. So if you guys aren't familiar with a character called Noam Chomsky, I highly encourage you to spend the next 10 to 15 years of your life reading everything he's ever written. And he has the reason I like to credit where I get my thinking from if it's not my own original thinking. Otherwise, I'm taking credit for other people's frameworks, right? So I'm using a sort of a borrowed dialogue pattern that Noam Chomsky uses. People say to him, the Geographer Society of America would say to him, but don't we already, how are we going to improve human rights? And his response would be, the gold standard of human rights was enacted by the then League of Nations, now United Nations, in 1948. So I'm going to facetiously do a parallel argument, and hopefully I'll make my point through this. If I asked all of you guys here today, how are we going to solve the energy crisis, you already know the answer. It's going to be renewables, that's half the crowd. The other half is going to shout fusion. Am I right? Is anyone going to say anything else? Knowing and so we know what a carbon credit should look like. And we know how we're going to address climate change, and we know we know the answer to all of our fundamental questions. And Noam Chomsky mirrors this in his style. So he goes, if you want to know what human rights look like, go read the Universal Charter. It was a multinational team that spent a decade putting the best human rights framework together. We have the answers. What we don't have is how do we implement them. The how of it is where all of these good ideas fail. So Bob Barton, one of my favorites, computer scientists who's recently passed away, he said the problem with good ideas is they don't often scale. So and that's really the point. Doing something there are only two networks. And what do I mean by network? I'm talking about the abstract mathematical concept of a graph, a bunch of vertices connected by a bunch of edges. A graph can represent anything. A graph can represent the human brain. It can represent the conversation that we're having. It could represent a marketplace. There are only two ways to introduce control within a graph-like system. That is, you appoint one node within the graph with special parameters, and it determines what all the other nodes do. That's central control. The other one, there is no better term for it in English than pricing. So the way pricing does two things. It says, hang on, there's a shortage here, and it creates the incentive to address the shortage, right? What everyone has got wrong, not everyone, what 99.999% of people get wrong is they try and use a central privileged node approach as their implementation strategy to solve their problem. So, carbon credits. I promise you, I mean, having not gone into the deep legislative side of it, I can tell you there is a standard that was appointed by a committee, and it's enforced by 3 guys in Geneva, and that's carbon credits, right? So they've adopted the central node approach. That doesn't scale. So every time you want to issue a carbon credit, think about it from a very basic perspective. I take out my cell phone. I've grown a sequoia tree from yay high to yay high. It's gone from 5 kilos to 10 kilos. So I've sequestered 5 more kilos, and I've got my phone in my hand. How do I enter that into a system and get people to benefit from that? So normally you have to go and register with a central authority, and then they send an inspector out, and it takes 15 months. And by the time it's done, the data is invalid, and then they've duplicated. So we know what we're going to do. The question that we need to solve is how do we do it? So if you can think pricing, how to use proof of work, which backs Bitcoin. The first thing it was used for is to stop email spam. So the idea was pricing via processing. It costs a second of time to send a proof of work email, but it takes no time to verify. So if you're a telemarketer and you want to send 1,000 spam emails, you need 1,000 seconds, which you don't have. So you can tune the proof of work cost to an email. So just by doing that, there's no spam filter. There's no central node that's reading emails, violating your privacy to make sure what is spam and what isn't, and if it was intended for you. The simple idea, invest 10 seconds of your time or don't send an email. And by pricing it, there is no central node. It just, the problem just doesn't exist. No telemarketer is going to go buy 40,000 teraflops of compute power so he can spam you, because it's not in his incentive. So using market mechanics without money to make problems just not exist. And there's no magic node, and we're just messaging like we used to do. That's magical. Now, if you can do that for carbon credits, if you can do that for voting, if you can do that for owning property, if you can do that for basic human rights and access to resource, man, I mean, that's the world I want to live in.
Right, well, now we are actually coming to an end. So thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Andrew, for sharing your knowledge with us. So now I would ask you all to transition to session 4 or lunch, depending on your schedule. But if you do have any questions for Andrew that you want to ask up front, you can come up to the stage and speak to him before your next session, but please be mindful of the time, as you only have 20 minutes to get to your next session. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
devices on silent mode. Thank you.
Everywhere you turn in North Korea, there's anti-American propaganda. Images of nuclear-tipped missiles pointed directly at the U.S. These themes are woven into the fabric of North Korean culture.
We've got to get through this checkpoint and basically get out of here while we can. Machine guns being fired over this wall. There it is. We need to stand against this wall.
Whether the group will rewrite the Constitution or postpone the next presidential election remains to be seen. For now, Maduro has unprecedented power over a country that continues to spiral out of control.
Today's world is an interesting one where the world is shaped on human rights. Much of the West has been aiming to support and protect human rights. Unfortunately, some parts of the world are going the total opposite direction than the West by withholding and violating basic human rights and going as far as disregarding human life. For example, the Human Freedom Index ranks countries on a scale from 10 to 0, with 10 being the highest commitment to human freedom and 0 being the lowest. In 2023, Switzerland scored the highest of a score of 9.01, and Syria scored the lowest with a score of 2.96. The World Justice Program has recorded from 2022 to 2023 the countries with the highest decline in the rule of law were Sudan, Mali, Iran, Nicaragua, and Afghanistan. This panel will focus on human rights being abused around the world, how it can be solved, or could it be solved? How or should the international community act to achieve equal human rights? Hello. I am Elias Brown. I am a 11th grade student here at ISADL and a member of the YFS series team. I would like to welcome you to the Human Rights in the Modern World panel. Joining us for this session, we are honored to welcome 3 experienced professionals who have tremendous expertise in the current state of human rights around the world. To my left, we have Timothy Cho. He is a North Korean human rights activist and 2-time defector. He has been imprisoned 4 times in North Korea and China. He is currently the co-secretary UK All-Parliamentary Group on North Korea and Open Doors UK and Ireland spokesperson for North Korea. In the middle, we have Mary Meinfish-Tobin. She's a human rights lawyer and legal lobbyist for the Swiss Amnesty and Business and Human Rights Group. She initiated the Platform for Business and Human Rights located at the University of Lausanne and is a team member of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Foundation. At the far end, we have François Mercier. He has worked for more than 25 years for Swiss non-governmental organizations. He has traveled to many countries in Africa and Latin America and accumulated a broad experience in relation to business and human rights issues. He is now working as a program manager on mining and human rights at Fast in Action. He is currently working for the Swiss Catholic Lenten Fund. The first 25 minutes of the session will allow our panelists to answer the questions I've prepared for them and discuss them openly, and with the remaining time allowing you, the audience, to ask any questions you have about human rights. If you'd like to ask a question at any point, please send the question on Mentimeter. Full encode is on the screen. So we're now going to begin with the questions. So the first question I have is for each of you to answer. What are you each currently working on? Mr. Cho, would you like to begin?
Thank you for having us, firstly. And having briefly introduced, I work as Secretariat of All-Party Parliamentary Group of North Korea. So the group is composed by 20 UK politicians from both houses and continue up. I think your microphone.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could just check the mics real quick. Is your mic working?
Not sure, but you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, we need the mics for the live stream. I know you guys can hear.
Yeah. What do I need?
Just.
Can you hear me now?
Can you guys?
So I work as secretary of the all-party parliament group in North Korea. So there are over 20 parliamentarians from both houses and advocating human rights violations and religious persecution and freedom values continue to promote in North Korea. And particularly, as you know, the fact I was born in North Korea and escaped. So I myself as an expert as well as victim and victimized person. So I continue speak around UK and world. Particularly I focus on young people. Yeah, that's what I'm doing currently.
Okay. Ms. Meinfisch-Tobin, would you like to add in?
Yeah, I was trying to think of what I'm working on because I think I work mostly on my family and they're exhausted from it probably. A number of years ago I was working in an American university and one day the faculty member said to me, "Oh, you're an activist," and I realized I am. I had never thought about it, but human rights is something I think about every day. So I'm involved with, as you already said, I'm a legal lobbyist with Amnesty International Business and Human Rights Group, a group that was set up with the help of a Shell former manager, and there's a group in Bern, and I work there with them. But I'm also with the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation. I'm the human rights and business person, and what we've been trying to do is bring education of human rights and business, both, into schools so that you guys can understand exactly how the world is working and what you can do and how you can change it. So we just had an exhibition in the gymnase in Burier, the biggest gymnase in the canton of Vaud. We had 30 portraits of human rights defenders, and we sent 100 books to the teachers so they could work with that through all the different languages. The history teachers, everybody could look at those amazing role models and talk to the students, and a number of them came from Switzerland but also from all over the world. I'm also working with a group called Innovate for Water, where we're trying to bring education into universities on good marketplaces for water, one of the biggest human rights problems coming and in the world today. I work a lot on women's issues. The Elle Entraide in the canton of Vaud, where we work with psychologists and sociologists, helping women who need help for whatever reason. We get subsidized by the canton of Vaud. And I'm also on the foundation of the Maison de la Femme. So if you can see, I'm sort of in many different things. In addition to that, I'm a university counselor. So I work on students individually.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mercier?
Yes, well, my area of focus generally is business and human rights. I work for Fasten Action, which is a Swiss Catholic foundation. You may have heard of it. And so I'm following various processes in Switzerland around business and human rights. You may have heard of the campaign for the Swiss Responsible Business Initiative. But I'm also oftentimes at the UN in Geneva, the United Nations, where there's also a working group on business and human rights. And more generally, we just also look at the responsibility of Swiss companies abroad. And one of my area of focus as well within the business sector is mining, the mining companies. Because, you know, for all the wonderful technology that we have, our mobile phone, and so we need a lot of resources. You need copper, you need lithium, you need cobalt for the batteries, you need all these minerals. And where they are mined, these are mostly poor regions where weak states or failed states. And there's a lot of human rights abuses related to mining. That's also one of my area of interest.
Thank you. Mr. Cho, this question is for you. Could you tell us from first-hand experience how and in what way has North Korea been abusing human rights?
My boy is just turning 1 year old today, and he can walk. Yeah, I sent my boy happy birthday. Yeah, and he can walk, and now he smiles, he expresses, and that's it, how it starts in North Korea. When you able to start walk, and first thing parents tell you to do, bow to Kim family picture frame. So that Kim family picture frame is hung on every individual house on the wall. And so now that's where he steps, he walk. And when you start from age 2 or 3, you go to nursery. When you go to nursery, there is same, that propaganda and brainwashed education comes. Then when you go outside, there are every village, town, city, they have Kim family monument, over 50,000 across the country. So born free, we call, Universal Declaration Human Rights Charter, Article 1 says everyone born free and should have the right. But when I specifically address North Korean issues, these kids, if my son, if he was born in North Korea, he was subjected from that moment of his birth certificate, that is like a slavery certificate. And you are now being told, demanded to give absolute loyalty and devotion, love. And if you don't, that is the consequence, which I even mentioned in my talk earlier this morning. You express something that is criticize the Kim family and the state. That is high treason in this country. If we follow any religious perspective, Christianity, Catholic, Hindu, Muslim, any, and that is high treason in North Korea, end up in prison camp. And I mentioned the teenagers watch the smuggled items of South Korean drama, Squid Game. Some of you watched the probe of that drama, and they were executed because they watched something from outside. It's complete information blockade. And there was one guy recently, I got this news, he was wearing a shirt with the Union Jack flag. But the Union Jack in the middle, North Korea said it's cross in the middle. So religious context, he was sent to prison camp because he simply was wearing that cloth, had the Union Jack on his shirt. So you can express, you can choose very basic rights here. And having mentioned this morning, look all around of you. Are you guys wearing the same cloth, same hairstyles, same shoes? No, we all choose different hairstyle and different clothes, different shoes. We don't realize actually. It seems like everyone standing in front of a mirror in the morning and you choose clothes and you come out and you realize, oh, we all have chosen different fashion, shoes, hairs. And freedom of movement, when I'm mentioning here, some of you in this room, you traveled all the way from different cities in Switzerland, but you wouldn't need travel document or permission from authorities. North Korea has it. You can't move between cities and towns and provinces without permission. It's a permanent lockdown. We all have experienced the COVID-19 lockdown where you couldn't move. That is permanent going on. And having mentioned about enemy class or hostile class in North Korea, about 30% of the total population, 25 million, that's a lot. Total population of 30%, and in that category as the hostile class. 3-generation punishment. I escaped this country over 17 years ago. Hasn't changed. It got worse. And other issues which I could mention, when they escape to outside, cross the border to China, and the most victimized are women and girls, because they know they could be arrested and sent back to North Korea, end up in gulags where Hitler operated all these gulags. North Korea exactly have the same system. And but in China, when they cross the border, now they are trapped by gang groups and transnational crime groups who sell them to single men. And there are many men need also wives in China as well, which have seen the recent low birth percentage in China. And every woman has price tag from age 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. So what I'm talking about here, abusing human rights, and I am here addressing the most basic thing here. And I'm glad we have one of the panelists who is working between business and human rights. There are a lot of countries, a lot of politicians, many prime ministers and presidents, they are struggle to distinguish between business and human rights, how they have to call out. So I will stop here because a lot I can tell you all day, but I need to give that opportunity to my fellow panelists as well. But that is North Korea. In the meantime, there are hundreds of thousands of prisoners in gulags at the moment, and they are being used to even weapon experiment. You heard that news in 2017. Kim Jong-un was assassinating his half-brother in Malaysia in the broad light, and used the chemical weapon spread on his face, and he died in half an hour. There are tons of those chemical and biological weapons. You can't produce it without human experiment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Ms. Mayan Fish-Tobin, could you give us some specific examples of human rights abuses that you have observed in the business world?
Well, I thought you were going to do that, but I can. There's abuses all the time in the business world. We're living in a canton here, which is quite interesting because there's an awful lot of businesses here in this canton and in Switzerland and in Ireland, where I come from, and in every country. The abuses, I don't know which specific ones I would go into. I'm going to leave that up to you. But what I would like more to talk about is the awareness in schools, in the syllabus, in universities, of human rights and business, and the impact of business on human rights globally. Because I don't know if you guys know, but business, if you look at the index of power in the world between countries and businesses, there are so many businesses up there that are more powerful than countries. And one of the things that I have been concerned about, because I'm a lawyer, is the fact that in law schools, we're not looking at teaching business and human rights. We're not looking at teaching it in engineering schools. We're not looking at teaching it in many different types of schools where people are going to be dealing with that. But I also think it should be in the syllabuses of high schools, because I think you have to start understanding how politics impacts how the world is working. So I kind of don't want to specifically talk about the question of who's not doing the right thing. I would rather maybe tell you that we were trying to set up an index of companies doing the right thing, and I said, please don't put me on the panel because I can't think of many.
Ms. Messier, this question's for you. In one of your current articles where you wrote about illegal gold mining in Colombia, could you tell us how it is possible and how it works that such illegal operations around the world exist and what threat they pose to human rights?
Exactly, but I think it's important to say that, yes, business also have a responsibility to protect human rights. And this is something that maybe 20 years ago was not really accepted, but nowadays, and even though it doesn't seem to be mainstreamed in universities, but at least at the level of the United Nations or internationally, it's broadly recognized that business have a responsibility. regarding human rights. And yes, I've been working on several examples. Maybe that's related to your question before. For example, 10 years ago when I arrived at Fast and Action, we were looking at a Swiss company which had mines, copper mines in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of the poorest countries in the world. And what we saw was appalling. I mean, the mine was just rejecting wastewater without treatment into the nearby river. So you had acids and heavy metals flowing into the river and flowing to the villages nearby. And now you can imagine in a poor country when people are living from subsistence farming and suddenly the field is well, you can't grow any food anymore because of the pollution, well, then you starve, no? And these people didn't have any possibility to complain. I mean, the Congo is a weak state. The state doesn't have the capacity to control, to make the necessary controls. So that's one of the examples we were working on. The Colombian example, which you are mentioning, was more recent. Gold is interesting as a commodity because I don't know, not many people know that Switzerland is refining about 1/3 of the gold being mined in the world. Hundreds of tons of gold are processed in Switzerland through 4 or 5 of the biggest refineries in the world. Now, none of these refineries is publishing any information, any data on where they source their gold, how much or whatever. It's completely intransparent. And we found out that one of the Swiss refineries was sourcing gold from Colombia, in one of the biggest mine in the world. And again, a lot of problems, destruction of wetlands, destruction of ecosystems, of protected species. Fishermen who used to fish in a nearby river could not fish anymore. And again, when you're living from that, you know, you have no subsistence anymore. So again, I believe, yes, companies have a responsibility to protect human rights. One of the things which, even though that principle is accepting, one of the things which we are still lacking, is binding regulation and possibilities for victims to access justice. At the moment, business and human rights is mostly governed by voluntary guidelines. So companies may do it. Some companies are doing good things, to be honest. But if they don't do it, there's no sanction and there's nothing happening.
Although, maybe I could add to that, although I think companies in Switzerland and in Europe are aware that there will be legislation, and it's coming at quite a strong rate from the European Union. The European Parliament and the European Council yesterday agreed on the new Corporate Sustainability Directive, which will make companies of a certain size responsible and which will put authorities into different countries to make them responsible. So the legislation is coming, and it's coming very quickly, but the governments, and that includes the government of Switzerland, are not moving fast enough to ensure that we have the legislation here in Switzerland.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, this question is for each of you to answer. It's, what do you each feel is the single greatest threat to the advancement of human rights in the present day, and what can we in the international community do to help prevent that? Mr. Cho, would you like to?
Thank you. That's very important question, and I like it. And we are in Switzerland. Do you know what you have in this country? United Nations. And why we have established this United Nations? And even 1948, after Second World War, and massive millions of persecution, genocide, and killing, and we said never again. And that's why we brought this United Nations and human rights charters as well. But how many countries and how many population now are going through this suffering? And this suffer will come exactly if we close our eye. We may have closed our one side eye, but if we continue to close both side eyes, that will come to you. That these charters and all institutions we have established because of for new generations to come. Why we said never again. But great suffering, violations, persecution are right now happening. And you think you can't do much. This was what Einstein said, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Not big task. Talk about it. Don't be silent and express it. Social media, schools, colleges, universities, and we have a great platform these days. And this is what I'm doing, my part. But your part, and you will have each one of you what gift you have in your heart, and use it. I think that's why I'm here today, to encourage you to do.
Yeah, so I am a kind of a Celt, you know, I come from a Celtic country, so I want to talk to you about soul, you know. And I heard it in another discussion about courage. The biggest problems in the world today is corruption. The biggest problem for me is inequality. The biggest problem probably in relation to human beings is fear. We're afraid to confront the inevitable, which is we will all die. And it's very Irish, sorry about that. We talk about that a lot, but it is true. It is true. Because if we were less fearful and if we just tried to do what was right, the world would be a different place. I think it's very important. Kindness is very important. Kindness to each other. I heard an amazing man called Edgar Morin. He's the father of complexity. UNESCO has him up there. He's 93 years old, a sociologist. And he said, education is failing because we're not teaching people to love each other. And I think that sounds really corny, I know that. But I think if there was more kindness, there might be less conflict, there might be less wars, there might be less trying to get just profit. And you know, you can't die with money. And I didn't agree with somebody I heard in another panel which said, everybody wants to be a banker and earn money. That's not been my experience with you guys. My experience with your generation has been you want to have a purpose. You want to know what you're going to do. And you need to know who you're going to work for and why.
Thank you.
Inequality and corruption.
Mr. Messier?
Yeah, maybe I can build on that. I think, you know, the accumulation of power is a big threat to human rights. And in terms of you're thinking of business and human rights, I mean, some businesses are just so big. I mean, their turnover is much bigger than the budget of many states. And they come, for example, with a business proposal because they want to establish a mine somewhere. And, you know, their sort of power is just so important. And I think this is something we have to be aware of because there have been some improvement in terms of businesses being more transparent, publishing now reports on their human rights due diligence on what they are doing. But still, we need more regulations for business. Like Mary was saying before, the EU is going forward. Switzerland is still waiting until developing new regulations on business with obligations with respect to human rights. We need possibilities for victims of human rights violations to be able to sue companies also in other jurisdictions. And that's very important. So yeah, maybe one thing I can conclude on is we need really these more binding regulations and legislation for business with respect to their obligations on human rights.
And brave governments.
And brave governments, and yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So last question I have, it's also for each of you. It's, what do you each anticipate being the most important areas to focus on human rights in the next decade?
Thank you. I did not know who I was when I age 7, when the first Kim died. I actually thought my God died, and for 3 days I did not eat and sleep and cry. And I asked my father, "Father, our God died. What are we going to do?" And my father told me, "No, he's not died. He lives in our heart forever." And he said, "We are not following the second Kim, and they now have a third Kim." In order to preserve that regime and dynasty, they do everything, even assassinate their activists on foreign soils. So something like what I do, or even and she's sitting next to me. She was different context, but she was sacked 3 times because of what she expressed against the injustice. For my case, I express what I'm doing against a regime like North Korea. I could be assassinated on foreign soil. So there is a cost and risk sacrifice. I achieved my freedom through sacrifice. And that education and what values we are following this. And the value is very significant. The value of, we mentioned already here, love, kindness, and care for others. When we have that alongside our democratic education, and that humanity has been progressing, evolved in this way. And you want to go forward, not backward, isn't it?
Yeah, I see huge problems in relation to artificial intelligence and human rights. I see huge problems in relation to technology as well. It's not just me, by the way, it's the United Nations as well. I think there's a huge problem because we don't have enough women, and I see there's a lot in this room, going into the scientific areas where you can be part of putting in the information needed so that the result that's coming out is more balanced, because at the moment that's not the case. Read any of the United Nations documents and their worries about human rights and artificial intelligence. We need women in engineering. We know that we don't have enough women in the areas coming up with what is necessary for us as women. That's really important, because we need balance in the world, you know? We need balance and we don't have it. And I always think we as women, and I'm just the only woman in the panel, so I'm going to just take this opportunity to say, girls, you need to stand up and take your positions and take your places and have courage, because it's needed, you know. I come from a country, the first woman president, Mary Robinson, was the first woman president of Ireland. She was also the first woman UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She's also one of the leaders on business and human rights. She was my hero. It's why I studied law. We also need legal profession, and I'm saying this as a lawyer. I don't know if there's any other lawyers in the room, but we need to change. I gave a talk about 3 months ago to 40 lawyers in Zurich. They were all in-house lawyers, about business and human rights, about leadership, because there's a lot of discussion about the facts that legal people were not taking leadership on this area. We're not moving forward. Very often in corporate situations, it's the lawyers who are actually telling what needs to be done in relation to risk management, and they're not talking, as far as I'm concerned, about the right things. You know, that's, I hope there's not any other lawyer in the room, but that's what I feel. That's what I feel. And when I talked to these 40 lawyers in Zurich, I said, okay, who here, and they were all in-house lawyers, I said, knows about business and human rights. Do you know how many people put up their hands? One. This is an area that is so important because of the power of multinational corporations, because of the extent of where they go. So these for me are the things we need to look at very, very carefully.
Okay, would you like to add in?
Yeah, no, if I think of the future, I think we will face many challenges, and, you know, things like equality, freedom, justice is not something that we should be taking for granted. And this is something you always have to fight for it. I mean, Mr. Cho, you were saying what Switzerland is the top one in the ranking for freedom, and so it might not always be so. And, you know, countries are changing suddenly. If you think of, I don't know, so the Human Rights Council, for example, at the United Nations, the 5 permanent members who are supposed to be here for, well, to work for the best in the world, the UK, France, Russia, China, and the US. I mean, none of them is respecting human rights internationally. So how can that work? You know, this is something, you know, we always have to fight for it. So you are the younger generation, and please never give up, and and always fight for human rights. Yeah.
If we become one of the 5 Security Council members, presidents, don't forget what we had this discussion today.
Okay, that is all I have in terms of questions. So we are now going to take a 2-minute break to allow you to process all of this information you just heard, and you can also take the time to finalize your question for our panelists. You could also ask a question in person by just raising your hand. Please state your name, your school, and your question. Please keep the questions brief, as I will try to tell as many as possible. Thank you. We will now begin with questions from the audience. So, okay, I see a lot of hands are up. So.
On a local level, what would you say is the Swiss government doing to inhibit human rights abuses by Swiss companies, and is it enough?
Go first.
Are you
I'll go
asking me?
second.
No, it's definitely not enough. You know, we had this whole campaign in 2020 on the Swiss Responsible Business Initiative, which was basically saying companies have a responsibility, they should exert due diligence, and they should be liable in case there's a human rights violation. And the government was completely against. There was a big campaign and saying, no, 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 we don't want that. Now we're seeing, as you mentioned, it's happening now in the EU. The EU has just decided of such regulations. In Switzerland, we only have like a law which says companies starting from the 1st of January this year should be publishing a report on their due diligence, so the way they are looking at their risk in the supply chains regarding human rights, the environment, and so. This will not change anything because no one is controlling these reports. So we really need more of a legislation like it is being developed in the EU, where you have a control authority and you have the possibility for victims, even if they are in other countries, to be able to sue companies.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you need to have the judiciary who understand better the whole area of business and human rights, which means you have to have the legal people, the lawyers who understand business and human rights, because otherwise, even if you have complaints, they're not going to be heard correctly. Now that companies have to write their reports, there's evidence that they're saying they're doing something, and that's something that's very complicated for companies now, because before they wrote reports, nobody understood what was going on, fine, but now it's getting a little bit more tricky. So the judiciary and the lawyers have to understand in Switzerland.
This is a question that popped up on the Mentimeter. It's, to what extent is propaganda a form of human rights violation?
I think that's yours.
I've been to United Nations 3 times now. One time I was requested to do press conference with a number of journalists because they appointed North Korea as one of the chairing membership in the United Nations, particularly weapon areas. And North Korea is one of the countries investing over 25% GDP into nuclear development, but their own people are starving at the moment. So when we talk about here, propaganda, such as United Nations, or even European Union, and look carefully, and how this kind of decision happens. Is it dependent, because we talk about business and human rights, those number of countries who are donating more money in the United Nations, that decision is very biased to make such as this case. And someone just asked that question about local level in Switzerland. But if I tell you local level in the UK as well at the moment, we're going through a lot of situations. There was one lady who was a lawyer. She was sacked from her company on a local level in Manchester because she expressed something about slavery production has been produced. That investment was come from one Chinese company. I love Chinese people. I married to someone who was born in China. But I have to clearly distinguish here between the government and that leader who impose such things and suppress and controls their voice. So that what propaganda, this such as UN's making decisions, and do we actually see that UN doing right things? Or it is just a bipartisan group who gives more money and they have to follow it? And I am telling you this because you are going to be in the next 5-10 years time, you are going to be in the membership of UN, whether we will continue to take such institutions like UN or EU. But if we want to continue to do that, this will has to be reviewed again and again. We have lawyers and mentioned even judiciary.
Propaganda as well, it's not just in North Korea. I'm very interested in the United States because there was a very interesting Do any of you read The Economist? I know it takes 100 years to read one, but there was a very interesting article. Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock Investment, was very much looking at environmental, social, and governance because he was looking at risk management, which comes back to business and human rights. So suddenly the Republican Party accused him of woke capitalism, they called it, which made me absolutely laugh, you know. But that's a form of propaganda too. You know, when politics is used to undermine probably something that is just pure risk management in view of the human rights problems we see worldwide.
This is another one in the Mentimeter I found. I think it's for you, Ms. Meinfisch-Tobin. Is someone wrote, "I'm Syrian. How do I actively raise awareness about Syria without endangering myself or my family?"
It's very complicated. I don't know where you're situated. I suppose you're here in Switzerland. I would say to all students today, though, be very, very careful what you put on social media, particularly if you're going back to countries that are going to hold you responsible. You know, I work in a school in Lausanne. We have students from Iran. We have students from countries at the moment that are going through a lot of trauma. Be very, very careful. For the lady from Syria, I think you'd be better to answer that one.
I don't know, or you may compliment, but I have met a lot of activists worldwide. For example, in Guatemala, people protesting against a mine have been criminalized, put into prison. Suddenly the army is at your door, and so on. And there's a lot of such examples around the world. And what has helped is when these people have a network, a local network, that they are strong as a, united in their area, but also an international network. So when the police knows you're supported and you're sort of looked at by international organizations in other countries, NGOs, that also is some sort of pressure that can protect the people. So really liaise with, that's what I would actually say, is trying to liaise with as many people as possible and make these links visible.
And build up your knowledge yourself,
but
education.
You may have also your own experience, I think. Yeah.
We get a lot of blackmails and threats. I'm an activist, and as well as I live in the UK. And often when I'm traveling, I have to think if anyone follows me from backside or next. And this is constant feeling, actually. But I always look at it myself. When I could not have access to pen and education in North Korea, I did not know who I was. Perhaps this could be context of our history. And we always have seen those figures of braveness, courage, and stand up against it. And who I mentioned, even someone, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in my speech this morning. A man who could spare his life if he was a German citizen if he cooperated with Hitler, but he didn't, and he stood against it. And think of back in our history, without those individuals stand with it, I think the world where we are in 2024 could not have been. And human rights violations, darkness, persecution is the context, past, present, and future. And Syria, I know the Assad regime, if I carefully mention it, I do have to use that word, reference regime. And they also get support from North Korea weapons. And North Korean weapons being used in Ukraine and in war as well against Ukrainian people. And someone like myself, and if I continue not tell, or if you're not going to tell what the regime of Assad has been doing, that will be buried. And one day, like I asked my parents, why could you not stand against the Kim family regime? And now when I was born, the prison country was there. Once it is taken, once it is gone, you have to pay a huge amount of cost and price to bring it back. Follow your heart.
Maybe become a lawyer.
Yeah, good.
For the Syrian question, maybe become a lawyer, because then you will be able to work out exactly how you want to approach it.
Okay.
Let's say.
Yeah, we have a question up front. here as well.
Thank you very much. I actually have a question for Mr. Cho. So you talked a lot about how in North Korea the regime brainwashes the population, etc. You also mentioned a class system in the country. I was just wondering if, well, I'm assuming that obviously most people are not extremely aware that they're being brainwashed. I was just wondering is maybe as if you go maybe up the class system, if that changes, or if like there are certain people, or just a bit more about that in general. Thank you very much.
That's a very good point, actually. The actually not many people are aware of our side, or even they realize they are brainwashed and indoctrinated and living in this surveillance society. They actually have lost the ability how to stand up. Over 70 years in this darkness, and particularly the economy. And this is one of the things, economy is very important. One country by herself cannot survive without interaction with one another. China, Vietnam, which I did write my dissertation and analyzing carefully in these communist dictatorship countries. But China, Vietnam, they don't have a story of hunger today. Even though dictatorship, they open the door and interact economy with one another. North Korea continue into great isolation. And without a piece of bread, and their life is a survival hunger game. At the same time, the ability to what to do, how to stand up. But you mentioned about upper class. Yes, there are about 20% at the core class. And that's what I'm encouraging them to take an action for. One day, someone might trigger the bullet. And I'm carefully mentioning here, although I am also passionate and I'm an advocate for love one another, because that was my experience within darkness and trauma, anger and hatred myself from young boy. I had gone through it. But when I made that decision to forgive, first my parents, and it was a great joy and finding my smile. And I remember 5 years ago when my mother passed away, she asked me one question. She was in hospital, was expecting to die. And before she died, she asked me, "Son, could you forgive me?" Only one sentence. I received that call on a public bus in Manchester. And I told her, I have already forgiven you. But within this love, but that does, we have to stand. While love express, but against injustice. And I encourage my home country in North Korea and those upper class and within elite, if they even listen to this, and they are not alone. Like who mentioned, raised that question in Syria. Sometimes we think we are alone, but we realize people who stand alongside. Look, I am standing with these two people. They were not born in North Korea. Look here, and you guys. And common humanity, we eat, smile, we cry together.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, as today's session is now coming to an end. Please join me in thanking the panelists for sharing their experience and knowledge into our very important topic. Thank you. I would ask that you now begin your transition to session 5, which begins at 1:20. If you do have questions for any of the panelists, you're free to approach the panelists, but be mindful of the time to get to your next session. Thank you and have a great day.